Should we start with the general texts and then discuss them and then work on towards the specific texts?
I think so.
Right, so we had four sources. We had the video and the 3 texts. Did you want to start with the Examine Life video? They started off by talking about walking. And they highlighted that walking is much more of a social act than it is a physical act. And that disabled people still go for a walk. They say, I'm going to go for a walk.
Interesting, like it's not necessarily how you do it, but it's the action that you're doing.
Yeah,
when you go for a walk, you're travelling from one space to another. Whether she's in a chair or she's walking her own 2 feet, she's still, taking a walk in effect.
It's the intellectual act rather than the physical act.
Yeah.
Walk in this case being going from one place to another, contemplating whatever it is you aim to do with said action.
And then she went on to highlight the difference between impairment and disability. She said how impairment is the physical impairment, the fact that she has problems with her muscles, whereas disability she's put as more of a social issue. That it was, society's limiting.
Yeah, societal condition and its limiting effects on it.
She kind of talks about how she went into a cafe, and even though she would be physically able to pick up a cup of coffee with her mouth, this isn't socially acceptable. You don't do that because that's not what people do. That's taboo almost. Jarjalo talk. What can the body do? And we have to look at the boundaries of the human.
Some of the other stuff in the text as well, talking about the otherness of people in terms of gender, orientation, the way you even move.
The in-between, it's talking about how there are these people who kind of fall in between spaces. As in like in between man or woman, or in between alive and dead in terms of disabled people.
Yeah, that tied in quite a bit with some of the ideas of deep democracy. The aspects of it regarding how people treat the poor and how the governing bodies treat the poor. Again, it's sort of tying into that they're so different, and it's how people react to that, because they were invisible to statistics, and as a result of that, they didn't get as much of a say in the way things were done.
I feel like rain.
We're just going to have to hope.
Did anyone bring an umbrella?
Me.
Yes, I did.
Okay. We can move it under we can move it under somewhere that's sheltered. I think we can move us under somewhere that's sheltered as well.
Yeah. I second that motion. Like under there, for example.
Yeah, we could just go under there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then one other thing from the Examine Life that we got is this idea of interdependence, how we all need each other's help, and how we don't recognise this. We don't recognise that that we need other people.
I think that theme as well of asking for help and compared to helping oneself did tie in quite a bit with the deep democracy as well. So the idea that if the poor work in cooperation with other people as well, it gives them a bit more of a voice. But equally so, they need to, as I said before, appreciate that their numbers can actually help them, and they need to make sure to utilise their own numbers in order to gain a bit more control and have a bit more clout, particularly in the political spectrum.
Yeah, and then the other shit text we had was the old moat reports. The kind of key thing with the old moat reports was you had the idea of the kind of constant improvement and constant implementation, and how it was never a finished process, how you kind of you plan and then you implement and then you evaluate and then you continually improve it. So this is circular process to it. Yeah.
There's never like one end to it all. It all builds up. It's cumulative.
Yeah.
Which again was mentioned in the deep democracy one. The idea that you can't do anything instantly. Everything has to be done with multiple iterations. And again, that theme of process is something which has come up countless times in everything we've been looking at over the last few weeks.
Right, and then we got our individual texts, which were deep democracy and cookery architecture.
Yeah. I think the ideas presented in the open kitchen are quite interesting, and the whole idea of comparing architecture to the process of cooking, and just the opening up of the kitchen to other people, sharing ideas, discussing, and adding their own bits to the conversation. It's quite a particularly interesting one.
Specific roles in gender within the text. It kind of mentioned how cookery is more inclusive for women. It's feminine, which I can't say I personally agree with. I quite enjoy cooking myself.
It's a bit presumptuous.
It's a
label
bit
it as such.
Yeah, it says, domestic cookery is traditionally women's everyday practice of making in the private sphere, which
It's
debatable. But still, what was more interesting is there was this idea of this kind of, again, involvement, engagement, getting people involved with the design process and getting everyone involved in the design
sharing
process.
the experience, I think.
Yeah. It's quite interesting the way it talks about recipes and how a possibility of a recipe for concrete, and just how a recipe is much more open to flexibility, to change. You can adapt it yourself. It's
personalise it. You can make it your own. There's a set recipe, but there's also the possibility of you improving, tweaking, and adding your own personal thought to it, and ideas of how you want it to taste, which is something that's not really available right now in the world of architecture. You have the architects that decide everything, and it's not really up for debate.
It kind of informalizes it slightly, and especially using within an open kitchen, she uses cake models of the building, and she has this workshop with people where they just kind of use cake as the building, and then they could just kind of share that around. When it's a professional model, people didn't want to sit down and discuss it, but when it was cake, people were much more willing to play around with the cake and move around the cake. We're talking about gender politics in the city. But in the very kind of trying to be accessible about it. It's much more about trying to make particularly architectural planning politics more inclusive, so people actually get a say in the city.
Women spending on architecture, things like that.
Well, the government spending, and urban spaces.
Spending all their millions in Birmingham, etc., on the library. Rather than put it into people.
Exactly.
Which was for cancer, stuff like that. Rather than repealing the cause of cancer years, etc.
Well, that's exactly the kind of stuff we want to chat about. Did you want to sit down?
Not just now.
Okay, no problem. Sure, thanks.
Yeah, so we looked at as well Deep Democracy, which is all about power relations between the poor and the more well-off people in Mumbai specifically, particularly looking at those in slums. It talks a lot about the idea of trying to sort of share intellectual resources in order to develop the slums themselves, and to ensure that the people of the slums make sure to claim upper class forms of events and know their own cumulative power in order to get gradual cumulative change. The idea of horizontal exchange was dwelled upon quite a bit, and the need to make sure that the slums are rendered visible rather than invisible, so that they've actually got the power to vote and the power to make proper change for themselves as well.
One of the things about recognition, so in exam life, Suvana, she like to live in Francisco because they have a disability accessible. So with this physical accessible lead to social acceptability. So it showed the place that accept the disabled. So it's also about the government that need to provide this for people, and then maybe self not taking seriously and neglect this kind of people, poor slums, disability people. I don't
Recognition as a whole ran across that. The Deep Democracy regarding the slums, Open Kitchen regarding general citizens, and Examine Life all looked at quite a bit at recognition and making sure that those which aren't represented as well do then get a better form of recognition amongst all of them. And the idea of sort of impairment and disability in some sense as well, because the poor are impaired with lack of money.
Yeah. Only poor know how they live in the poor, so they use these poor to develop how they live, and from recognition from bottom to the upper level.
I think
I would show the main one is the sharing of knowledge, because it appears in all of the texts.
yeah, it's very much the idea of sharing of knowledge and the distribution of power. It's like enabling people. In fact, enabling was something that came across pretty much among all the texts.
Yeah.
Enabling people to be involved more in the city, involved more in the design processes.
Yeah, and involved more in taking control of their life, I would say.
Exactly.
Well.
There's that idea of recognizing that we all need each other. We all need each other, and we all can help each other, and therefore we can all enable each other. And as soon as once we recognise that, recognise that we are interdependent. In Deep Democracy in the City, it talks about the importance of almost trivialising the planning process so it's more inclusive. And what's very interesting with this session today is with our sign. Last time we had free chat as a handwritten sign. This time we put free knowledge, architecture talk, gender politics in the city. And this has been a far more intimidating sign than free chat. Free chat has is a much more accessible way. It's with free chat, that's very casual. We've trivialized it. And according to know that if we put free chat this time, we would probably get more people sitting down, and we'd still be able to discuss the same themes because we put free knowledge, architecture talk, and used a fair amount of quite intimidating words. We've put anyone off from actually sitting down with us.
Regarding the sign as well, it does relate quite a bit to the open kitchen idea of making things more accessible, which links in exactly with what you were just saying about the idea that now that we've made it a bit more serious, it's definitely less inviting. The whole idea of the kitchen and the open kitchen was to make it accessible to groups that the author presumed had not been involved in the process before, whereas now we've just distanced ourselves from at least a certain portion of the people walking around us. And since with our first experiment people joined us because people were already sat down, no one's taken the plunge this time, and no one's going to, because we're sort of putting them off a little bit.
Even with the sweets.
Even with the sweets. What possessed you to come in free chat?
I very much like the idea. I used to live in Oxford, and I became good friends with a couple of people because they held up a sign that said, "Ask us anything."
I had a friend who had a similar idea to it. We say, what is it called? The Sandbox Project, where you just go to a city and then get all the people together if you can do, and get ideas together, and then meet each other quite regularly, and in the end of like a month period, hold like a festival of what the city has to offer and what like local like musicians and things are about, just so that like you can then put an event on at the end of the month and say, look, this is our city, this is what we like about our city, this is what we do.
Sandbox.